Every morning that I wake up, I roll over, and like many of you, I reach for my cell phone. And I'm not checking to see what the latest weather is or the breaking news that may have occurred over the night. I'm checking to ensure that I have a message that reads, "Good morning, my love. Good morning, my everything." You see, my mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and we knew that communication was going to be critical for her quality of life. And I'm going to pause there because I know many of you are probably thinking, why am I talking about my mom's health at a cybersecurity conference? Well, what I would later find out is that the way that we manage our personal health is a lot like the way we manage our compliance posture in any infrastructure. And what I mean by that is her personal health and monitoring her personal health requires a lot of lab work, a lot of imaging, and all of that to produce reports, to produce diagnosis, to run treatment options. We do a lot of that on the cloud. We run multiple types of scans to check for vulnerabilities, to check for several different things to include DLP, all to put together some form of a mitigation strategy. But the biggest part that I found out or learned along the way is that with good compliance baked in, we have the ability to have early detection. And early detection leads to early remediation. And early remediation leads to smaller blast radius. Good afternoon. My name is Brendan Jones, and I have the privilege of serving those who serve this country. I'm a cloud security engineer at USAA, and I've been in cybersecurity for a little over 10 years with a focus in cloud and risk management. And today, we're going to talk about how USAA built a cloud security assurance program using AWS. Along with me in this discussion, I have Ivan Santos and Puneet Gugliani. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Ivan to introduce himself.
Thank you, Brandon. So I'm Ivan, and as Brandon said, I'm also on USAA's Cloud Security Engineering team. I have about 8 years of security experience, and prior to coming to USAA in 2019, I spent my time doing InfoSec analyst work, and one of those years I was also a pen tester. And then coming over to USAA, I shifted gears and I was able to partake in the GRC side of the house. And one of those years prior to this team, I was also an internal IT security auditor. And so now the cool part about being on this team in this role is I get to merge those two worlds and create our cloud security compliance program. And so with that being said, I'll pass off to our awesome AWS partner, Puneet.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Puneet Gugliani, and I'm part of the AWS Security Firm Services. I've been with AWS for almost 2 years, going to be 2 years in August. Spent 18 months of my career in information security, wearing different hats from security analyst to operations to GRC, and then being an auditor in my past life. So bringing all that experience together and executing that and implementing that onto the cloud and working with clients like USAA just makes us unique and makes us, the preferred, altogether the partners in enabling compliance and regulation within the environment. Over to you, Brandon.
Thank you. So let's look at the agenda topic items. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about our companies. You have two companies on the stage. Just want to give you guys a little overview of what we actually do. Second thing we want to do is talk about our start of the journey that we took into adopting the cloud at USAA. We want to talk about the approach as well as the actual cloud compliance program and what that encompasses. The other thing we want to do is talk about the things that we learned along the way. And lastly, we want to talk about how we're going to remain resilient moving into the future. So with that being said, USAA is a Fortune 100 company. It operates in the financial services sector. And I just want to take a second to actually read the mission statement, because the true value of USAA is its members. The mission of the association is to facilitate the financial security of its members, associates, and their families through a provision of full-range, highly competitive financial products and services. In so doing, USAA seeks to be the provider of choice for the military community. And with that being said, you're going to hear us talk about our members being top of mind with a lot of the things that we did in our cloud. Also, with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet to introduce AWS Security Assurance Services.
Thank you, Brandon. As I mentioned, I'm part of the AWS Security Assurance Services. So primarily, our team is the industry certified assessors. What does that mean is we are QSA certified, HITRUST certified. We are prior experienced auditors who bring and help to achieve and maintain and automate compliance within the AWS Cloud and helping our customers be audit ready and regulatory compliant to the frameworks and the controls which they're adopting within the public cloud like AWS.
Thank you, Puneet. So what did we ask AWS Security Assurance Services to help us figure out? Those three things are outlined on the screen. First, we wanted to get a snapshot of our current compliance posture. We call that our current health within our cloud environment. The second thing we wanted to do is actually get an understanding of our maturity rating. And that would be anywhere from controls failing and being insufficient all the way to being strong and fully implemented. The last thing we wanted to do was do our risk identification. That would include gaps, identifying those gaps, and then putting action plans behind those. So throughout this discussion, you're going to see us highlight those three things that we solved for. Jumping right into the discussion, I want to share a quote. This quote comes from Guru Haley, Chief Architect of the Cloud at USAA. Cloud compliance requires a mindset, tool set, and skill set shift. Creating the compliance program and bringing in external perspective was instrumental in driving the required culture shift with all stakeholders. There's three words on there that I want to highlight, and you're going to hear us talk about it once again throughout this presentation. Those three things are mindset, tool set, and skill set shift. This was instrumental in our success at USAA. So let's actually talk about what that journey looked like. The very first thing that we did was we kept our members in mind. We wanted to say, hey, would this be the best option for our members? And we looked at things like scalability, auto remediation, cost optimization, and all of this could be managed from a central location. The other thing that we looked at is, will we still be able to meet our regulatory requirements? And with that, we wanted to see if we can bake in our regulatory requirements and check those with some form of compliance checks. And lastly, the third thing we wanted to do was enable those security landing zones. At USAA, we call it safe landing. And what safe landing does, it provides a tool set that is provisioned and managed from our Cloud Center of Excellence. The next slide that I go into is going to discuss a little bit more about what is comprised or what comprises USAA's Cloud Center of Excellence. But at the end of the day, those safe landing tools allow us to do our monitoring, logging, reporting, remediation, detecting, all of that from that centralized team or teams. So what USAA did was we built out two separate functions. The first function that we built out is a cloud governance review. And that cloud governance review consists of 11 different panel members who have to approve use cases for all types of cloud deployments. All types being your SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. And each one of those different domains are looking for their respective requirements to be included and to pass before we can sign any contract or go into deployment into those models. That is all governed by our cloud governance team. The panel consists of different people, different teams from several different areas to include CTO, our architects are in there. Information security has several roles in there. We have a privacy representative in there as well. Several others. And then the other thing that we did in parallel with building out a cloud governance review is the Cloud Center of Excellence. And within that Cloud Center of Excellence, we have 4 different functional areas. The first is going to be data management. They obviously are managing everything on the data plane from RDS to data requirements and the enforcement of those data requirements. The other thing that we have in place is our platform infrastructure, and they're managing several different items that are serverless, like EKS Fargate and Lambdas. Along with them, we have our buddies from infrastructure services. And infrastructure services are responsible for different type of items like VPCs, our EC2s, as well as several other types of services to be deployed. And last but least, we have the mighty information security team. And they're responsible for several different deployments from Security Hub to CloudWatch, CloudTrail. So let's actually look and see what this timeline consisted of for USAA. So if you see on the screen, our very first bullet item starts in 2019. And this is where we chose AWS to be our CSP, our cloud service provider. So we went into contract with them so we could start deploying use cases. The next bullet is critical for our success, and that was to actually fund our safe landing activities. So if you notice, this happened 1 quarter after we signed our contract, once again, which was critical because these are the teams responsible for doing the plumbing work to ensure that application teams can land in a secure and safe location. So with that being said, our third bullet that happened is we had our first use case, deploy into the cloud. The cool part with this is that it took a year for us to do that plumbing work to ensure that that application that was going to the cloud would be in a secure landing zone. The fourth thing that happened is we engaged security or assurance services to come in and start doing a compliance assessment against us and help us mature our compliance posture within the cloud. That happened in Q1 2021. And then our most recent activity is the actual standing up of the cloud that I'm part of and Ivan is part of to this day. That happened toward the later end of last year, and that is standing up the cloud security compliance program. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Paneet to discuss our approach.
All right, thank you, Brandon. As Brandon talked about the journey, so I'm going to go a little bit deep into the approach. So when we talk about cloud security program, right, so we took a very simple approach when it comes to defining the whole different elements within the AWS Cloud Security Program. So we took the approach of, which most of you, would be aware about, is technology, process, and the people. So I'm going to go first into the deep dive into the technology element. So when we talk about technology, we looked at 3 different aspects within technology. The first piece which we looked at was configuring the controls within the AWS services. What I mean by that is, let's say if you are building out S3 buckets or you're building out EC2 instances, you're going to make sure that you're configuring those services to comply to the regulatory requirements which that use case is going to tie to from a services perspective. Then the other aspect which comes into play with these AWS services is, so let's say you're configuring EC2s or S3, you want to make sure you are configuring AWS IAM or AWS KMS to satisfy those requirements and bring that service model together. The second aspect which we looked at from a controls perspective was, so we are a compliance function, right? So we wanted to make sure we embed ourselves into the engineering. So we made sure that the engineering function and we are coding for the automation of the compliance. So what I mean by that particular aspect is, so when you look at the cloud, it gives you a flexibility to automate. It gives you a flexibility to push the code through infrastructure as a code or push the code through the pipelines, and it's enabling you to create least privileges by putting in the guardrails and enabling the service control policies at the very end stack itself when it's building the whole functionality or the automation component. And then the last piece in the technology aspect was, like other organizations, USAA has invested into enterprise controls, right? They have invested into the controls which are servicing a larger enterprise altogether. So we wanted to make sure we are adopting those enterprise controls and making it as the best use case for the cloud. Like, for example, is the single sign-ons, right? We want to make sure we are authenticating against the single sign-ons which are used across the enterprise itself. The second example which comes into play from the control standpoint is the security operations telemetry, right? You create your detections, you create your correlations, you have an incident response which is responding to the incidents all across the enterprise. We wanted to make sure we are adopting those enterprise controls and making it relevant for AWS and making it a part of the whole compliance posture within AWS. As we look through these 3 different aspects of the control, the next I wanted to walk you through is the control landscape. So we identified, so Ivan over here is going to go through the program in detail and how the program was built. So we identified around 20 plus domains within the compliance program. So what I've highlighted over here are the 9 key domains from a compliance standpoint. And when we look at these 9 key domains, all of the security frameworks and the regulatory requirements have some kind of a control attached to those domains. So example, identity and access management. Every organization does user provisioning, does role management, does permissions, right? And they look at the privileged accesses. So what we took was, okay, let's see if all the controls which are aligned within the identity and access management space, what are the different services which needs to be brought together from an AWS standpoint, whether it's AWS IAM, whether it's AWS single sign-on, whether it's AWS Secrets Manager, right? And then the second aspect is every organization deals with data, right? And when you talk about data, the first thing comes into play from a compliance standpoint is, okay, what are my key controls? My key controls are either I'm doing encryption at rest or am I doing encryption in transit? And what controls come into play is the cryptography, right? So you take AWS KMS, AWS Cloud HSM, AWS Certificate Manager, that comes together and brings that whole compliance to the regulatory requirements these domains are creating within the environment itself. So that's how there are other domains like data management, software development, vulnerability management. So we create the whole framework keeping in mind what are the different combination of AWS services which needs to come together and act as a holistic point of view from a requirements which can be met within the environment. So as we've gone through the landscape in detail, the next component I wanted to bring together is the workflow. How did we make it a reality? How did we make sure that we are practically implementing it? Right, I'm sure over here, a lot of you guys are GRC professionals, are your builders, your engineers, right? So in any use case, you see builders pushing the code within the pipeline. So either they're using CloudFormation or a third-party infrastructure as a code. So you're pushing the code through those pipelines, and the use case we are going through is this particular code wants to create a VPC within AWS and wants to create an EC2 and an S3. Right, that's basically a compute and a storage service within AWS. So once the code gets pushed, now you see that the code's pushing, there's EC2 which is getting created, there's an Amazon S3 which is getting created. So we're going to focus on data, the S3. So the S3 is being created, a bucket is being created. What is my first preventative control which is going to come into play? So as the code rolls out, you're going to make sure what's the access on my data? What's my access on the buckets? So you're going to make sure that you have safe landed IAM and you have assigned the right kind of roles, right kind of permissions, which are satisfying the requirement from a regulatory control standpoint. The second aspect which comes into the data is encryption, right? You want to make sure that the right kind of keys are being generated. You want to make sure the ownership of the keys is there. The keys are being rotated on time. So the second preventative control comes into play is KMS. So as the code is being deployed, you see there are two other services which are coming together and simplifying the preventative controls within the environment. Now at this stage, the bucket has been created, the roles have been defined, the permissions have been implemented, the encryption has been done. So now as a business user, I want to access the bucket. Either I want to read it, either I want to write it, or I want to do some kind of analysis on that data. So what happens now? My corrective controls or my detective controls come into play. So what happens if I access a bucket? I have a security VPC where all of my security controls are implemented. Whether it's my CloudTrail, whether it's my security hub, whether it's my guard duty, whether it's my OpenSearch, doesn't matter, right? So as somebody accesses data within S3, my first detective control comes into play is it generates an event. That event is sent into the CloudTrail. The CloudTrail further sends the event into Security Hub. Now what is Security Hub doing out here? Like Security Hub is now looking at the detections which are being created within Security Hub and analyzing that event, whether that event is malicious or not. And if it's a malicious event, or then it sends it into the Amazon OpenSearch service. Now you want to make sure that is it only restricted to this S3, or is it a larger event which is happening within other different services as well. So that contextualization and the correlation is coming together. Now that OpenSearch service detects there is a malicious event. Now what happens? You've done the detection, you've done the identification. Now next thing which happens is the corrective action. So you create a Lambda function. You create a Lambda function to take that particular alert and have the function written in such a way which goes out and remediates your S3 and blocks that particular at the source itself. So this is how we simplify the compliance, which is how we simplify the overall flow, and that's what makes it easier for us to comply to the regulatory requirements. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about IAM, when you talk about KMS, you talk about CloudTrail, you talk about Security Hub, it's all related to the various security controls from the identity and access management, data encryption, from the security monitoring and alerting. All of that is coming together from a regulatory standpoint. So as we went through the practical example of the overall flow of the technology, right, the next piece I wanted to highlight from the overall program standpoint in our approach was the process, right? So technology piece is key, that the process keys are the is a key as well. So the first thing which I wanted to highlight in this particular approach, as Brandon mentioned earlier in his slide deck, was cloud governance. So we wanted to make sure the cloud governance processes which have been implemented. We wanted to make sure cloud governance, risk assessment methodologies which have been implemented, we're adopting that as part of the compliance program. So we wanted to make sure the privacy, stakeholders, the data stakeholders, the risk assessment stakeholders in that cloud governance are being incorporated as part of the framework and are contributing from a compliance standpoint. The second aspect, when you talk about engineering, right? And when you talk about engineering, everybody is either adopting Agile or has adopted Agile or SAFe framework. So we wanted to make sure that we're bringing compliance and mapping it with the Agile or a SAFe framework altogether. And when we talk about SAFe framework, we're talking about Kanban boards, we're talking about features, we're talking about stories, we're talking about epics. So we brought all of our compliance related activities, whether it's defining the controls, whether it's defining the scripts, whether it's making sure we're automating the controls, everything was documented and managed through a SAFe framework altogether. Then the third aspect, which I have highlighted in the workflow as well, was making sure we are documenting what's preventative versus detective versus corrective. Because if you define what's preventative, you want to make sure you're still enabling detective controls on those preventative controls to say whether those controls are working effectively or not. You're trusting those controls, but you need to verify that those controls are working and giving and are stopping the misconfigurations at the prevention level itself, right? And then the last piece of the process was, as everybody would have heard about DevOps or DevSecOps, right? We wanted to integrate compliance at each and every phase. What does that mean is, when you talk about DevSecOps, you talk about continuous development, continuous deployment, continuous integration, continuous checks, right? So we wanted to make sure we are enabling compliance-related controls at each and every phase and not at the very end of the whole model. So we want to make sure that if there's a requirement for security code review, we wanted to make sure we are doing the DAST and the SAS testing and enabling that into the pipelines so that the rules can be checked, so that the rules can check each and every piece of the code as it's being pushed within the pipeline. Or we are making sure that we are restricting the push of the code through the pipeline roles and making it least privileged and not being done by the developers using their individual identities. So we wanted to make sure we are enabling those controls and documenting and putting it in a procedural manner. As we talked about technology, we talked about process. Now I'm going to go into the last piece, which is the people. And in the people, we again took three different elements. The first element was enabling compliance guidance and educating our business control partners, the second line of defense and the third line of defense. Because when we talk about compliance, when we talk about regulations, it's always about making sure what business control partner, who our business control partners are, who's our second line of defense, who's our third line of defense, educating them, making them understand what the shared responsibility model is, right? I'm sure all of you understand security of the cloud and security in the cloud. Security of the cloud, AWS. Security in the cloud service customer, right? And that's where we come and play the role. What is my role is from a compliance standpoint for security in the cloud. We wanted to make sure that we are educating, we are providing guidance to the second line, the third line, the business control partners, so that they understand what security in the cloud means, so that they can attest and validate and make sure we are building these controls and testing those controls effectively. The second aspect of the people came in was partnering with the engineering teams or the COEs, which is the Center of Excellences. Brandon talked about platform infrastructure. He talked about infrastructure services, data management, right? We wanted to make sure we are integrated with all of these entities and providing them guidance from a compliance perspective and making sure that anything which we are coding or doing a merge or doing a deployment of, it's in a compliant fashion and the controls are built from that standpoint. And then the last piece was educating and guiding the business application teams, because those are the teams they need, which we wanted to make sure they understand what it takes to go into the cloud and what it takes to make sure how the healthy cloud posture can be maintained without violating any kind of a compliance and not creating any kind of a disharmony within the environment itself. So as I've gone through the approach from a technology, we touched base on the AWS services, we touched base on the processes, we touched base on the people, right, aspect. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ivan, who's going to walk us through the program itself.
Thank you, Puneet. Just gonna, a little nervous, so gotta clear my throat. Awesome, thank you, Puneet. So I just kind of want us to recap where we are so far, because a lot of info is being thrown y'all's way. And so Brandon did a really good job taking us through the what, the why, and the USAA journey. Puneet really did a deep dive on our PPTs, people, processes, and technology. And now I'm going to try my best to take you all through the practical execution of the program itself. What does it look like from a day-to-day? How did we create this from the ground up? And how it is providing value to present day already since its inception. And so we wanted to start off with going over what we think is a very replicable equation, and so providing some value to y'all. If you were to take this back to your organization, we think this is a really nice, simple breakdown of how to start a program like this. And so we started off with what we call the discovery phase. And so here we really did our best to do our due diligence to identify and meet with all relevant cloud stakeholders. This is where we also met with the SMEs. We did our due diligence. We analyzed all use cases in our cloud. What does our current cloud compliance posture look like? What is our current tech stack? What touches the cloud? What doesn't? We met with our architects. We reviewed all diagrams, all documentation. We really just did our best to stand at that tower, look at the field, and understand everything that's going on. And what this did here was allowed us to do what we call the scoping phase. And doing that due diligence in our discovery really allowed us to accurately scope what this cloud compliance program is going to touch based on our USAA organizational structure. And by identifying the right system owners and the right teams for the work, this also enabled us to start our tracking mechanism for the work. And pointing back to Puneet's slide, we utilized the agile methodology, specifically the SAFe framework. So here we were able to accurately identify those teams and start our reporting and tracking mechanism via Jira and our Confluence wikis accordingly. And so This initial discovery plus scoping took around 7+ weeks. And ultimately, this led to the creation of what we just call the RACI matrix. And for those of y'all that aren't aware, RACI is just a matrix highlighting who's responsible, who's accountable, who do you consult, who do you inform. And this is a giant matrix, very custom to USAA's environment. And we have broken it out into 3 sub-matrices, if you will, and the first one being the program RACI. And so, as Puneet highlighted in that 9-domain key domain services slide, we have actually identified 24 domains total, and all of that has been mapped out in a RACI format showing who's accountable for what team is doing what, et cetera, et cetera. The second one being what we call the executive RACI. And again, as Puneet highlighted, here we really harp on and highlight the shared responsibility model, not only with AWS, but our internal shared responsibility model as well. So that way we can truly hold those teams accountable to the work that they're doing. And then finally, we have what we call the technical RACI. And I would say this is the bread and butter of this giant RACI, because this is the actual document that highlights the controls that we have from an enterprise that are leverageable for AWS Cloud, and it calls out what's missing. And really putting this all together leads to the next big document, which we'll get into the next slide. But before I do, I just really want to emphasize that this may not be the most fun work up front, especially for your engineers, your builders. But if you do this right from the get-go, this is really what has enabled us at USAA to shift that needle left within our development lifecycle. And so, and I'll go into that more in the lessons learned, but I really just want you to understand that this was the equation of our success, because we do consider it to be our foundation. And so, from the creation of this giant RACI, it led us to the next giant document. And this is what we just call the custom cloud cross map. And once again, this is a giant document, y'all. And you can see here at USAA, as Brandon said, we're in the financial services, and we are heavily regulated. And so we pooled from different frameworks that were most relevant for our goal of meeting our regulatory preparedness objectives. And so just from left to right, you can see we utilize NIST, FFIEC, the CMMC, MITRE ATT&CK framework, and then the Cloud Security Alliance's Cloud Controls Matrix. And I know it's a lot, so our practical approach was we utilized CSA's CCM document as the starting point. And then from there, as we did our discovery and our scoping, we leveraged on the different frameworks accordingly to address the different regulatory requirements that were required of USAA. And so from this, before I get into the metrics, we have also been able to not only map the controls to these different frameworks, but catalog the AWS security controls that USAA already has against these different requirements within the framework. So what this has really done to provide value is it's shown us what's missing, right? So we've done the initial mapping, we've done the analysis, now we know it's missing. We have the RACI, so we know who's accountable, we know who the teams are, we can start assigning work. And so some of the key metrics you see up here that we've been able to provide y'all, as y'all can see on the left, through this work, we've identified the 20+ secure domains, 24 to be exact to date. And within those parent domains, if you will, we've established 70+ control objectives directly related to cloud itself. And across all that mapped between the 40+ different cloud services that USAA is currently using. And then on the right side, you can see because of the good work that was done in the RACI, we've established the 28 accountable teams. We've already created over 30+ compliance-related epics. And we've already done 25+ maturity assessments across all the different control categories that have been established from this custom controls cross map. And there's a lot more in this, y'all, but we're going to go on. So we have the RACI. We have this giant custom controls cross map. So this next slide is going to cover how do we actually put those to use on a day-to-day. And so I put that graphic in there to depict to y'all before I get into it that this is an ongoing, living process, methodology, and mindset. As Puneet and Brandon highlighted earlier, our goal is to truly move the compliance left, right? And back to Groom's quote, that is an entire mind shift altogether. And so with this execution, this is where we are present day, but we will absolutely adapt, we will improve on it, and adjust it accordingly as USAA, as we scale more workloads into the cloud environment. So here we're just going to break it down very high level into our 3 pillars that we have been doing on a day-to-day that have been proven to show value thus far. So the very first pillar, just like any good due diligence, we do our DE and OE testing of our cloud environments, and here we really take the time to do a baseline identification of any cloud security risks. We measure them and then we rate them based on the impact to our business. And the next pillar that is probably the bread and butter of our program's execution are these custom control test scripts. And we could have done a talk on these test scripts, just on these test scripts, right? These are beefy test scripts that really go deep from a high-level control plane, but also down to if we're evaluating a specific pipeline, what to look for within the IAC, like it goes deep, right? And so this has really been our guiding star as we conduct our validation testing with the different control owners and the accountable teams. And big shout out to AWS Security Assurance Services. Our partnership with them has been invaluable because these are very custom tailored to our USAA environments, and that's how we've been able to action on and provide value based on the gaps identified and then the custom remediation action plans. And of course, agility, right? With these custom control test scripts, the next step for us is putting these in like an automation pipeline. And Brandon will talk more about that when he covers future proofing. But now that we have the, I don't want to say the grunt work done, but now that we have the baseline done, we can use this and leverage it as USAA scales more workloads into the cloud. And then finally, our third pillar of our execution is from our DEOE testing, our custom controls test scripts, we aggregate everything and we package it in a way that we can showcase whether we are audited, second line comes in and whatnot, and it's stored in a one-stop shop. We just call it the controls repository. And USAA, we've built a custom in-house tool, but it basically functions as an artifact repo. And so once again, just moving towards our goal of being regulatory prepared. And before I close out this slide, once again, I just really want to harp on that. These custom controls test scripts have been the crux of our day-to-day. And they not only provide the testing guidance, but this is where we actually document the evidence. We report, we do the risk ratings on here, and then we provide the recommendations as well for the partners to act on accordingly. And so this is kind of how we do it. So moving forward, So in this program's life cycle so far, we've been able to report on some cool things, and I'll just go down the line. So once again, this controls evidence repository, we call it the artifact repo. This has really been an awesome one-stop shop aggregation of everything we have assessed, evidenced, and dispositioned on, right? And having all this together, easily accessible, tracked, reported on, this has allowed us as the first line to do our own gap analysis for cloud specifically. And this has been really huge because once again, it's allowed us to be more agile in identifying the issues, alerting our engineers, remediating from the get-go. So once again, back to that strategy, bolting compliance on at the beginning. And so we've already had some self-identified issues that we brought up ourselves through this program. And from those self-identified issues, thanks to the custom controls test scripts, we've also been able to create the specific remediation action plans for the teams to utilize in order to close out those issues. And a really cool one for us is present day today, we've already closed out 66% of those self-identified issues. That took about 2 quarters over the span of 2 PI planning sessions, if y'all are utilizing the agile methodology. And so that's pretty awesome, right? And so you can already see in this short lifetime of standing up this program, it has already provided value to us, and of course, back to our mission, to our members, as we scale more workloads and more of their data into the cloud. And so that kind of wraps up the practical execution of how we've been utilizing this program so far. I know there's a lot that was thrown your way, and we did not nearly go as deep as we could have, but hopefully that's good for now, and we'll take questions at the end and have our info up there as well to connect. Now I'm going to kind of shift hats, and we're going to cover some lessons learned so far. So we've been doing this a while. We've seen some wins. We've seen some friction. And so we just kind of want to share with y'all, if you go and attempt to create a program like this, these are some lessons learned, but also recommendations that we feel, looking back in retrospect, could potentially benefit you and your organization. So the very, very first one, education and training. So what was really cool, referencing back to the keynotes this morning, is they also emphasize that your people are such a valuable asset. And here at USAA, we do believe that investing in the right people will really allow us to scale the right way and do things the secure way for our members. And so you can just see here on the screen, these are the partners that we have utilized over our cloud journey so far. And shout out to AWS. Back in 2019, when we kicked it off with them, ProServe came in and they gave us the well-architected framework training and the security engineering training. And then fast forward to last year, once again, another shout out to SAS, Security Assurance Services. They gave us the Cloud Audit Academy training. So I don't know if y'all remember, but this was showcased in the keynote this morning. I believe that's a newer addition, very focused on PCI DSS, but we got the OG training, right? And so this Cloud Audit Academy was so invaluable to us, the 101 being specifically for our USAA executives, and then the 201 for all first, second, and third line partners dealing with all things cloud and security. And this really enabled us to understand what it means to be audit ready from a cloud perspective and what we needed to do as an organization to continue to move that needle, once again, towards our regulatory preparedness objectives. So invaluable training. Thank you. Puneet was actually a trainer for that. Victor Mu, I don't know if you're in here, and then the SAS team, really good job, y'all. And then on the bottom half, these are our other partners that we've been leveraging. And so once again, shout out to CSA. We have partnered with them, and they provide us training for their CCAK and CCSK programs, and as well as the certification. So they really do a good job covering the GRC side of the Cloud House. And then we have SANS. We have a voucher program with SANS, and they do a good job deep diving on the technical hands-on aspect of the cloud. And if y'all are not aware, they do have a newish program called the SANS Cloud ACE, and they usually put some good stuff out there that we have been leveraging, and it's been really good for us. And then finally, we have ACG, A Cloud Guru. I know these guys are a big player, and so we also leverage it at USAA, but the cool part here is just to showcase that the leadership is truly invested in scaling and skilling up its employees, our leadership has decided to open up ACG not just to cloud staff, but to all IT staff now, because the vision is there, and as we scale more to cloud, we want our people to be ready. And so just thank you, USA leadership. It's been really awesome. And just as a lessons learned, this has really allowed us, back to Garum's quote, to have that skill set and tool set shift as we skill up accordingly. So that covers education and training. The next one probably doesn't need to be said, but I'm gonna say it anyway, y'all. This is a big takeaway for us. Document, 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 right? And then once again, it is not the most fun work, and there probably will be friction during the discovery. Yeah, so, but you have to do it. This is part of, back to Graham's quote, this is part of that overall culture shift. As you continue to move that needle left, you're gonna run into some pain, but if you can push through it, it's gonna be so worth it, and you're gonna be able to scale accordingly. And so for us, we documented every step of the way. The giant RACI, document. The custom cloud cross-map, a document. All the custom controlled test scripts for all 24 security domains within all 60 plus security objectives, documentation, right? And so this has been key to our success and our regulatory readiness and preparedness. And you can just see we call out the AWS repo once again, and then we've actually been able to leverage all this documentation to also improve the USAA standards by baking in some cloud-related policies, baselines, and standards as well. So it's been good. So document. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up my portion with some very quick accomplishments. And first one being, we've said it throughout the slide, shifting the compliance needle left of our development cycle. And so embedding compliance with public cloud security engineering. This has been a really awesome thing for us, and Puneet kind of showcased one of our sample workflows, and this has allowed us to be agile and quick, and having this kind of baseline in place will allow us to hit that next step of automation, which Brandon's going to cover. And then the next one, partnerships with business control stakeholders. So Puneet really went over the PPTs, people process technologies, and I just want to highlight that again. The people aspect of this program was so critical in our success. And so throughout our deep dives, our continuous testing, validation, evidencing, dispositioning, we've been able to create more intimate relationships just internally and making other teams aware of the why, pointing back to our mission, securing our members, and this has really been invaluable. Just like what was presented in this morning's keynote, we could not have done it alone as a cloud security team, and we did it way better together with the partnerships all across the board, from our IT partners to our second line and our third line. And then third quick win was facts versus perceptions. So here I just want to call out that originally, we had done a self-assessment, an attempt ourselves to do this program, and when we did, we thought we were mature. And then we brought in SAS, Security Assurance Services, and after that reevaluation, we realized we were not as mature as we thought. And that was a really good thing for us, because it gave us the wake-up call, and it really prompted us to start to steer the ship the right way, bake compliance left, get the organization aware. And so that's what's happened. And then finally, we faced a big cloud audit in Q1 of this year. And this is a really cool win for us, because we leveraged everything I just highlighted for y'all in this audit. We were ready. We demoed everything they asked for. They could pick a la carte what control they wanted to see. We had it. And so even we consider ourselves baseline. We want to get to intermediate and then to get to strong. So even within our baselining of this program, it has already provided value in terms of our regulatory preparedness objectives. And so with that, I will close this out here and pass it back to Brandon to talk future-proofing.
Thank you, Evan. All right, so how are we looking at remaining resilient in the future? It's a big deal. We don't only want to survive in the future, we want to thrive in the future. So one of the first things we want to look at doing is synthetic testing. Synthetic testing in our production environment, which allows us to test for functionality and security while not impeding on the application and the users. that are using those applications in real time. So that's one of the first things we want to look at doing. The second thing is we want to onboard the rest of that COE to have compliance partners as well. So we want to onboard some more compliance individuals like ourselves that are dual trained in an engineering/compliance role. We think that that will better assist us in our audit and regulatory preparedness. And last but least, the big foot stomp of the day that I've heard from many sessions is automating. Right? We want to look at automating a lot of things that we are currently doing manually in our cloud and in our compliance checks. So one of those things would be potentially including Audit Manager to aggregate some of this information, perhaps do some API pulls to start pulling that data for us, as well as having some anomaly detections incorporated in there with some compliance policies that enforce those. All right, I got 2 more slides for you guys. And so the first one is going to talk about our objectives with augmenting a privacy pillar. And when I say augmenting a privacy pillar, we do have a privacy representative in that cloud review panel. However, they're really looking at it from a third-party supplier objective. We want to ensure that we are meeting that in our IaaS environment, in our public cloud environment as well. We know that the trends of regulatory requirements are going to continue to increase. We see things like CCPA, GDPR, all that's good stuff. So we want to incorporate that into our review process and make it a little bit more streamlined. And so the second thing is actually going to be closely aligned with that, and that's going to be business use case driven compliance checks. And obviously we know that the big hitters in our industry are going to be PHI, PCI, and PII. And so we want to incorporate specific compliance checks related to data-driven use cases. So that's something else we want to look at doing. This would allow app teams to be able to deploy at a faster rate, go to market a little bit quicker. And third but least, we want to adopt the CRI, the Cloud Risk Institute, profile extension of cloud. We want to incorporate that framework so we could be on par with several other people in the industry. Ivan showed you guys the frameworks that we are aligned with, but we also want to incorporate this other element of a framework as well, do a gap analysis and see what we are missing. All right, and moving right along, we want to do real-time control compliance reporting. This is going to tie back to some of that tools that I was talking about with the use of Audit Manager, as well as some of those API pools that we would be doing, all to present a dashboard in real time that anybody from first line, third line, external can look at and get a snapshot of our compliance posture. That's critical for our success moving into the future. The other thing we want to do is adopt newer frameworks. And I know that I just talked about CRI, but not just CRI, other industry leaders as well, whether that's going to be NIST 853 version 5 or whatever is to come. We want to be able to adopt that at a pretty quick pace and to be able to, once again, not just survive the future, but thrive in the future. And then the very last one we want to do actually incorporates both of those, and that's going to be continuous regulatory response. So in order to have that, we have to have those other two at the top. So real-time reporting, once again, and the ability to adopt to new frameworks will help us to have a regulatory response in a continuous manner. All right, if we lost you, and I know we're starting to push time, I do want to talk about some key takeaways. So the very first is embedding compliance at the start of the journey. This is the big one that we learned. We learned this by bringing in AWS Security Assurance Services. And so that was critical for our success, and we know that it should have been baked up front, and now that's a big lesson that we learned. So the other one is continuous education at all levels. Ivan showcased a lot of the training that we received at USAA at all levels. That would be from engineers to executives to third line, first line, all across the board, just so we're all on the same page and we're all talking the same language when it comes to cloud. That was critical for our success. The other one is dedicated security compliance individuals. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking at potentially having compliance individuals in those other domains within the COE. We know that bringing us on board obviously helped dramatically increase our compliance posture, so we found that to be very successful. The third, we found out that automation is critical for our success. Paneet walked through a use case that we have for a Lambda function that does auto remediation. We obviously want to do things like that, but in a compliance manner as well. And then the very last one, I want to give a shout out to Jason Morris for his strategy and vision with all of this, as he allowed us to onboard our internal partners from our top-down view, and that was related to our education. That was related to the visibility of what we're doing in our cloud program, our cloud security program, and then also onboarding our external partners. So that has been very instrumental to our success. As Ivan talked about our facts versus reality, it painted the accurate narrative of where we're at. So that was critical for our success in the cloud. And I want to leave the same way that we started. And this quote comes from Joseph Arthur, Assistant Vice President, Information Security and Engineering. Developing this program and in assembling these experts allowed us to unlock the power of the cloud, leverage automation to ensure security compliance requirements are baked in. And by baked in, he's referring to the DevSecOps model that we have today at USAA. With that being said, I want to open it up for questions. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you everyone for joining us for this. If you guys, I know we threw a lot of information at you. We walked you like for 24 slides in an hour, and there was too much detail in there. So if anybody wants to have a quick chat or wants to learn about how we adopted it and wants to do a deep dive with us, feel free to email us or catch us on the side or outside. We're more than happy to go into the details and provide that insight. And if in your while you're checking out, just make sure you fill in the survey and provide us your ratings on that. Thank you.
Puneet, maybe go back to the